Hi, my name is Nicole. I am the host of the Daily Vent podcast, a medical mom podcast. Today, we are joined by Hilarie, who is an amazing dietitian who we have worked with for John. She is going to share all about her knowledge of blended foods, and we're going to talk about that today and the pros of it, the benefits, and just different ways to get started. And to kind of encourage you that, you don't have to start big. There's little things that you can do to start the blended food journey. It's not all or nothing. So today we're going to talk about that. And I'm going to let Hilarie introduce herself, get a little history of how she started, and we'll go from there. So welcome, Hilarie.
Yeah, well, thank you for me on the show. I've started listening from the beginning. I know you just started it, but every episode you make me laugh. You make me think deeply about something. You shift my perspective on something. And so I love what you're doing. And this is going to be a really amazing podcast. It already is for people who are listening. So thank you for what you're doing too.
Thank you. Means a lot. Thank you.
Yeah. So a little history about me. How did I get into being a dietitian? Honestly, I I grew up wanting to be a dietitian. I wanted to do something medical, so I started with nursing, and I don't know, it just wasn't really for me. And then I actually did one of those stupid tests where it tells you what you should be based on personality things, and it told me I should be a fashion buyer. And so I went to New York City and I tried to do that for a little bit and quickly realized I'm just a girl from the Midwest. I like to shop at Target, and I know absolutely nothing about fashion. But then fast forward, I came back, went to Michigan State, was trying to figure out my path, had a friend in doing dietitian school, that they call it dietetics. And I was like, that's cool. I really like science and food and helping people, and, just needed to do something that would transfer some of my credits. So I just kind of fell into this path. So that's kind of how I chose to be a dietitian, I guess. But when you do your training, you go through these certain paths, and it can be a hospital system, do community nutrition, or you can do food service, and there's other things too. But I fell into the hospital system path, and I you just kind of when you're starting a job, you just go through a lot of different spaces. So I worked in the inpatient spaces PICU, NICU, PEDS floor, the GI clinic, just different places. And I ended up in a neurodevelopment clinic for a majority of my clinical time. So that was following a lot of high-risk NICU babies that are born really early, babies that are born with rare conditions, brain injuries, and, just a lot of kids who have feeding tubes for different medical reasons. And I was there for a while. So I worked there for, I think, 3 or 4 years. And that's where I, learned a lot about tube feeding and just working with different families. And, I don't know how much you want me to get into, because you asked how I got into dietitian and stuff, right?
Yeah, how you became a dietitian and just kind of how you got to where you are today. I mean, share whatever you want to share. I mean, it's interesting to me. There's not many dietitians out there doing blended food stuff. So I love to hear how they got to where they are.
Okay. Yeah, I was I'm probably getting ahead of myself here, but yeah, so I was working with kids with feeding tubes, and you probably experience, and I think a lot of the listeners experience, it's my caseload is really big. I probably had 1,500 kids on my caseload. I was talking to 20 plus families a day. Nobody was tolerating their feeding plan. And it was just a lot of okay, let's try another formula. Let's slow down the feeds. Let's do smaller feeds. Let's see what medications will be helpful. And it was just kind of I don't know. I hate to say it, but I kind of was defeated by my job because I felt like I wasn't helping any families in the way that they actually wanted to be helped. I didn't have a lot of tools in my toolbox to help them other than, trying these solutions that, yes, they kept their symptoms under control, but the reality was it was just making things harder for the family at home because more medications and new formulas just mean more calls to insurance, another thing to do. We're slowing down the feeds, and yeah, that keeps them from puking. But, when you're feeding around the clock, that creates so many more demands for the family on top of everything else that you have going on. And I don't know, I was just pretty defeated in my job. And I started to just kind of think through things through. And at the time I was having these families. So there's a very small pocket of families who were blending their food at home. And we were a clinic that was like pro blend, meaning that we would like not tell somebody that they couldn't do that. But I don't think we were very like very helpful. They were often just doing whatever they wanted to do. And they were the families, though, that I wasn't hearing from very often. So I started to think about that, and I was like, why are these the families that don't call me very often? What's going on? So I just started to realize that they're the ones that are not having any digestive issues. They're the ones that are tolerating their feeding plan, but they're also the families that don't have to call me for everything. They feel much more in control. They feel it's more intuitive to make adjustments to the feeding plan. And so I think this is kind of cool. And as a dietitian, I'm like, I want to work with food. This is like my passion is food and nutrition. And when you're dealing with formula all the time, you kind of lose that part of the of the knowledge that you have gained in your training. So I was like, I have so many calls. Like, how can I help people need me less? And how can I give them some control back? So anyway, I bought myself a blender. I started looking into the research, started just making recipes. I created my Instagram account to share what I was learning, but also to learn from other people because we don't get any training on this. So I was like, I need to learn from parents who are doing this and see how they're doing it. And it just kind of snowballed from there. And now it's what I do full time. And I love what I do. It's like so rewarding to be able to help families with this. And to actually feel like I'm helping people with what they want to get help with. I mean, I remember one of the first families I worked with, and I tell the story often, but it was probably a week or two after we had gotten started. She had made her first blend. She emailed me and said, I didn't realize how much I was missing this. I feel like a parent again. And that just hit me, I was like, we take so much control from families and we like tell them exactly what to do. And yes, we can come up with this perfect plan on paper, but it's so disconnecting for families when they feel like they have no control over what they're doing. And, to just be able to hand back that control and give them that aspect of parenting again was like, wow, this is really cool. Like, this is what I'm meant to do. And I absolutely love what I do now.
Yeah. I mean, that's huge. For me, I mean, I talk about a lot on this podcast with a lot of other parents too. It's just the feeling like a parent. It's very hard as a medical parent to feel just like a parent because you're so many things before a parent. You're a nurse, a caretaker, a social worker, a janitor. I mean, everything. So it was huge when I started being able to make his food. And that was one of the things when I was in the hospital, when I was explaining to his GI team that I wanted to do blended foods. They're like, oh, that's, it's a lot of work, blah, blah. And I'm like, but I want to do it. I want to make my kid food like every other mom does. Like, why
Right.
can't I? Like, if you have a healthy kid, you can't just give them a pre-made thing of formula every time. And when they're 2, you give them food, you make them food. And that's what I want to do. So,
Mhm.
I mean, granted, it is a lot to add on top of everything else that we do as medical parents, but it's any type of normalcy we crave. We crave normalcy. So it is really cool to be able to be like, oh, I'm making my son food. And, yes, we might batch it and freeze it for, the week, but it's still making them food, which is really cool.
Yeah, for
So
sure.
that's a good way to look at it. How long have you had your company?
I started this in 2021, end of 2021. Yeah,
Okay.
2001. So about 3 years now that we've
Okay.
been, and I was doing a little bit of both hospital and um, running this for a while, and now I do this full time. So it's been a few years, but before that, I was helping families with blends in the clinical setting for 4 years before that. But again, I was like, I wasn't actually blending myself, and I wasn't, I'd give them a recipe and be like, okay, here you go, and good luck. I mean, we would try to learn together, but it wasn't until I was actually blending and making recipes myself and practicing the tube feeding equipment where I felt like I'm much more helpful to families.
Hmm. Yeah. What did you just when you like got equipment to practice with? Did you just get it from like the workplace or something like that to practice with? Because it is hard to. I guess to experiment with different blends to see what works in the tubes and stuff, right? So you had to do a lot of trial and error.
Right, right. And that's where that it can be kind of hard. I know we'll get into some of the ways to make it easier, but yeah, I bought a blender off of Facebook Marketplace. So I bought a blend tech, and I'm sure we can talk about the different blender options. I At the time I was still working at the hospital, so I had some connections with dietitian reps at medical supply companies. So they would have all these extra like extension sets or feeding like G-tube buttons or syringes and in their garage that were just not being used. So they gave me a couple of those. And then, my husband and I love to cook. So I just would think about like, okay, what kind of recipe would I want to make? And I would practice with how things were blended and then let it sit in the fridge, see what happened to it. And now I blend quite often still and have made so many recipes. So I get a sense of how things work together. But that can be the hard part is when you have so much on your plate and you're trying to figure out, you know, you're so used to calorie controlled feeding plans. And then you go from just that to just throwing food in the blender is very, very intimidating. But you don't really have time to sit there and be like, okay, how many calories do I need? And then you come up with this blend, but then you go to the kitchen and it's like way more volume than you expected. And so I think that's a huge part is if you can not have that burden of figuring out what to blend and just have recipes that make it easy to meet calorie needs and provide that variety, it can make this, it's still some more work, but it takes a lot of the burden off of families of, and just the stress of like the getting the calories right and your team thinking you're doing something wrong. Like if you can show them like, here's how we meet calorie needs and here's their variety, I think that can be so helpful. And, we can get into how my recipes are set up to make that easier at some point too.
Yeah, I will say your recipes are amazing because they're like real meals. Like I honestly have said to my husband, like whenever I make this for John, I should like make it for us because I have the ingredients. Like they are real meals. So it's refreshing because I honestly thought getting into this that they were going to just be like the most random things put together, and I don't even know what I expected. But they are actually like one of John's favorite thing is the pesto deli ham sandwich. And it's literally bread and ham and cheese and pesto and hummus and like it's food, like it's actual food. I remember I made one that, oh my gosh, it smelled so good. It was like the Mediterranean chicken salad or chicken bowl or whatever, and it was just like smelled like Greek goodness. I'm like, this boy, and I make videos about it that my son is eating better than I am because
Sure.
he is. And I always say to Jordan, my husband, like, if we could just eat what he did, we would be so healthy and lose so much weight if we could just like follow this plan. Meanwhile, I'm just eating Chick-fil-A while I'm blending up this healthy stuff. But
You can't go wrong with
you can't.
Chick-fil-A, so it's
Yeah,
so
I know.
good. But
Chick-fil-A is.
that was my goal, really. It's so good. But that was my goal is to like make these recipes mimic regular meals. It's important to me that they're not all like perfect, but I want them to smell good if we can and mimic a regular meal because if it's not appetizing to you or if the child is old enough and able to participate, like if they're grossed out by it, that's not going to help their digestive issues either. So it was really important to me to mimic family meals and just even create more normalcy because I think, I don't know how familiar you are with like the typical way dietitians are if they're going to do blended diets, there's a typical way that they help families and I just didn't feel like that worked super well. um I don't know if it's helpful to get into that a little bit and explain the
Yeah, I
difference.
mean, that was one of the things I wanted to talk about is when I first started to reach out to his GI and dietitian team at the hospital when we were inpatient and I brought up blended food, no one had really any idea about it or how to do it. And then when I found a dietitian at the hospital, they told me that I had to find this other person that worked somewhat inpatient, but then they had a 6-month waiting list to get in. And so it was really hard to just even find somebody who knew what to do. Um, and then when I had done a lot of research online, thankfully I found Hilarie, but I had found, some other people and it was very different. So Hilarie is very, I wish more people were like Hilarie in the way that she does her recipes because I found that a lot of blended food, dietitian or just in general, they just kind of push the same recipe. Like you just can batch Like, and I feel like a lot of, maybe it's more like the hospital dietitians too. Like, you just batch one thing and that's what they eat every time. Like, you do a big batch of like the same thing. So you don't do multiple different variations or recipes or give your kid, and I think they don't think about the fact that even though they're not tasting it orally, you still don't want to give the same meal. I mean, you might as well, I don't know, if you want to talk about, I'm not good at explaining it. So if you want to explain kind of the differences of different type of dietitians who do blended meals and stuff like that.
Yeah, honestly, I think you were doing a good job explaining it. But um, what I think is typical, and the resources that I started with was to have these like recipe templates. The idea is that you're making the nutritionally complete blend for the child. So it's like this many cups of fruit, this many cups of vegetables, this protein, following the food group so that theoretically then that blend is going to be the right calories and provide all of the nutrition they need in one day. It's the same kind of thought process that you have with formula where, the term nutritionally complete gets thrown around a lot and I sort of hate it, but it's one of the thoughts where, if you have a tube feeding plan and you're giving the same formula every day for every meal, if that's short in a vitamin, of course it's going to be bad. Like if John's regimen didn't have enough vitamin C, he would get a deficiency. So it is important for that formula plan to be nutritionally complete. But that's not the same thing with real food, which offers that flexibility to get nutrition over time, like how we all eat by mouth. I'm not trying to get all my vitamins and minerals every day. I mean, to be honest, I'm not even sure if I'm getting all my vitamins and minerals daily, spread out, but you just try
Yeah,
to
I'm
provide.
not.
No, I don't think most of us are, and tube feeders are held to this standard of like daily perfection, and it's really hard for clinicians to get away from
Yes.
making sure they're perfect and make sure they get all their nutrition. And I understand it's like you're prescribing this feeding plan, and if anything was wrong, it would be on them. It's whole thing. But my experience is that kids, even on a mediocre blended diet, are still getting better nutrition than their counterparts who are often very picky. But anyway, to get back to your question, so what dietitians do is they have these like recipe templates, or they give these families like they plug it into a nutrition software thing where it's like give exactly like this much sweet potato, this much green bean, this fruit, and give that every day because it's going to be all their vitamins and minerals. And while that can work for some, it does. Some people really enjoy that where they just do the same thing every day, or maybe they can make a couple swaps here and there. What I found is it still feels not as connecting as being able to make regular meals that you can maybe share or just like feel more normal. It also isn't always the most helpful for digestive issues because I find kids who get the same thing every day, their digestive tract just isn't as happy as when they get a little bit more variety. And I don't know, I don't think this has really been studied, but I think part of it is we just need different nutrients from different foods to help our microbiome and to help with our gut health. I think about if I was to have the same smoothie every day, even if it was really nutritious and I had all my vitamins and minerals, after a while, your body's just like, I want something different. I want a little bit of variety in there. And so I think being able to rotate through different recipes can make a big difference. And also, too, when you have these like templates that you're following or these recipes, every time your child grows or just needs more calories or something's not going right, you have to completely redo this recipe. And I think that's why there's such these long waiting lists because they're so tailored to each child and there's so much adjusting that has to be done. And again, the family doesn't feel comfortable adjusting it. It's still the dietitian that is the one that needs to be adjusting it because they still have the control over what's in that recipe and making sure it's complete. And it's still that stress of like it still just keeps a lot of stress. So that's why I've had these recipes that match the calorie range of formula. I know this part is a little confusing, so hopefully I can explain it well, but calorie or formulas have calorie concentration, usually from 1 calorie per ml to 1.5 calorie per ml. It's an easy way for us to keep track of calorie intake. And, the higher calorie per ml it is, the more calorie dense the formula is. Hopefully that makes sense.
Hmm.
But I make my recipes the same way where if you're providing your kiddo with a 1.5 calorie per ml formula, you could use blend recipes that are also 1.5 calorie per ml. So that way, when you're getting started, you can just swap out one meal. The daily calorie intake stays the same. So you're not making too many changes. You're not rocking the boat too much, but you're swapping that meal one for one, testing food out. And that's how you can provide variety too, is if you just use the same recipes at the same calorie concentration, you can use them interchangeably, keep the feeding plan the same, provide a lot of variety. And it doesn't have to be like 2 new recipes a day. You can have 3 recipes for the week that you batch blend, and next week do a different one, and provide a lot of variety.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I also look at it as like, for John, the goal is one day to not have the tube anymore, right? And so I look at it as if I'm giving him the same thing every day, and then all of a sudden we expect him to just eat orally and take all these other things, your system is going to be like so messed up. It's like as an adult, if you eat something you've never eaten before, you're always eating the same thing, then you add something in, our system, gets all messed up. We get backed up, or we don't get backed up. There's just a lot of things that can happen. Or it's like, this is a really bad analogy, but when you go to the gym and you want to work on your cardio and you do the treadmill every day, and then after a couple of months you're really good at the treadmill and your cardio on the treadmill is great, but then you decide to go try the stairmaster and you die within a minute on the stairmaster. It's like, because your gut's not being exercised differently, if that makes sense. So by giving a whole different array of things, I feel like, I don't know, I have seen my son since we've started blended foods. When did I start with you? In October? Like,
Yeah, I think
right?
so.
So we came home in September, and John had only ever been on just Kendamil formula his whole life. Um, and then we started blended foods very slowly, very slow process. And I mean, I kid you not, every time we go up on his ounces, like, like we go back on the formula and then go up on the blended food, his energy is just, I mean, it's crazy. Like his hair and nails won't stop growing. Like they're growing like crazy. His energy, his like mental, like the things that he can learn, he learns so much more faster than before. I mean, granted, he is home now, so it's a better environment than the hospital, but even from just like when he was home the first month and he wasn't on it compared to just this, last 2 months, it's just crazy. Like, I don't
Mhm.
even know how to explain it. His growth, he used to be constipated all the time. And it was like every other day we were giving him something to help with that. And now we haven't had to do that. And since that first week we started, we haven't had to give him anything. He hasn't had any bowel issues. Um, it has made such an impact on him. And it's 1,000% worth it. I'm so glad that we've done it. And now he's taking things orally, like more like he'll eat things orally. Um, he's gagging way less. I mean, I don't know. It's just it's very cool. His poops are like, I mean, it's weird to be on a podcast talking about your kid's poop, but like his poops are normal. And I will say, like, the one thing is his poops are different all the time. If like, and I think that's because we give him so many different things, whereas before it was like always the same old whatever with the formula. And then, with these medical kids, they get different meds all the time, antibiotics and stuff that'll throw it off. But yeah, I mean, it has changed his life adding in these blended foods, and it's pretty amazing. It is a lot of work, but not really though. It is, but it isn't. It's one of those things where it's like you get to add another like mom thing on. Like I will add anything onto my to-do list that is a mom thing. Like I don't want to
Yeah.
add any more medical things onto my to-do list, but if it's a mom thing, like I can do something to be a mom, I have no problem adding it in. So
Yep.
it's very cool. It's a really cool thing to do. Almost like, I don't know, I'll put John in his little stander in the kitchen while I make him food, and that's like such a cool thing. Like if I don't have a nurse, and he has to be right next to me. And so for people who aren't familiar with this podcast, I probably should have started out with this. My son has a trach and vent, so he requires 24/7 eyes. So if we have nursing, and I'm making food, he'll be like right there in the living room with them. But if not, he has to be next to me. But yeah, it's been really awesome, and I'm very thankful that we found you. And when I posted a video that we were doing blended foods for the first time, the amount of moms who reached out to me saying, I had no idea this was an option. No one has ever mentioned this to me before. Like, my kid is 2 and still on formula or preemie formula, like fortified. Like, no one's mentioned this. I didn't know this was a thing. And so honestly, if I wouldn't have, I follow like a lot of different medical families online, and I think I figured out about it because of a mom who had posted about it, that she wanted to make her kids own food. And I was like, wait, that's a thing. And so it's like, how are we supposed to know about it if unless we see it like that or someone brings it up to us, which is
Right.
sad. I mean, so I don't know if you want to, go into why is it not common that it's not, shared with us parents all the time? Why are GI doctors not pushing this more? Why are dietitians not pushing this more? And there's a couple reasons. So I don't know if you want to go into that next.
Yeah, definitely. I think, and sadly, I think there's even quite a few medical professionals that aren't aware that it's a thing, or if they are, they're told that it's not safe and it's not, it's too hard to meet nutrient needs. You're going to clog your feeding tube. You're going to make your child sick. All these things that clinicians are taught. And I don't know, it's not that this is a new thing. I think it's continuing to grow in interest. And actually, the interesting thing is we didn't always have formula. So we had tube feeding before we had formula. And so hospitals actually used to, the only option was to blend food and give it through a feeding tube. And
Hmm.
then formula companies started coming out with different products in like the 60s, 70s. They were thought to be more sterile, more safe, more convenient. And so hospitals started using those instead. And then that really took off. And then I think our medical system is very influenced by big food and big pharma. And so formula became the way to do things. And then we're kind of slowly seeing this switch of people now being more interested in real food. But I think it's because clinicians are just taught. I mean, I didn't know this was an option until parents told me they were doing this. So, you just aren't really even aware that it's a thing. But I also think that there's now more commercial products available too that are more real food. So I think even families aren't even aware of all the different like formulas available. I think so often you're told like here are your couple options, choose between these ones. As a parent, you don't have time to look up every single product that's available. So you just say, okay, you're the professional, we'll use what you think is best. But there's so many options. I mean, a blended diet doesn't even have to mean that you're blending the food. Like you can use companies make products where they're blending the food for you, putting it into a package that's shelf stable that you can use for 100% of their nutrition. There's products that are, 100% real food that's pureed. There's some that's are, real food based where some real food is added in. So there's a lot of options, and that can make this a lot easier too. I know that's something you and I are going to work on, is finding you a product that you can use, because you're going to have busy days. You're going to have days where you have a lot of appointments and you have to travel, or the power goes out and you don't have anything ready to go, and your blender obviously can't work when the power's out. So I think it's really
Hmm.
good to have these products that are more real food based if that's your goal. You can also use regular formula at times too. Like, it's that no ways is an anti-formula talk. We are both very much like whatever works for your family is the best. And formula serves a purpose. I think plays an important role in tube feeding. There's conditions where you really need a formula. You need an amino acid based formula, or you need, just different things that are out there for your specific medical condition. So it's not to say that you have to do blending. I just think that people, like you said, aren't aware that it's an option, or that there's ways to make this easier so that you can incorporate it. Because, I can't even think of, I mean, I would say most families that are in our community group or that I work with one-on-one are using a formula in some capacity. Because,
Hmm.
like, I mean, if you think about it, and I think we've talked about this, but people who eat by mouth, I mean, we're not eating 100% home cooked meals. We're going out, we're getting convenience foods, eating protein bars and protein shakes. And it doesn't have to be an all or nothing thing with tube feeding either. You can definitely incorporate formula into the plan, and even just 1 or 2 meals a day of blended food can make a huge difference for digestion, for your the emotional benefits, all the stuff for overall health. So it doesn't have to be this all or nothing approach either.
Yeah. I mean, John will hopefully be all blended eventually, but right now he's what? I think he gets 11 hours of his formula at night, and then during the day he gets two different blended food meals. I mean, eventually we'll. But he also started. He came home 22 hours continuous J formula feeds, so we've come a long way. But realistically, I mean, yeah, like you said, I mean, you DoorDash or you drive through or we all live in America, we live very fast, busy lifestyles, instant gratification. That's the type of lifestyle it is to be an American nowadays. And so I think that is probably one reason why, in the hospital system too, they push these convenience type of things for these families because our lives are already very hard as medical parents that whatever we can do to make it faster, easier. And I 100% get it. And so it makes sense. But what frustrates me is that there are a lot of great blended food options from these big from other companies. So it's like not even like you have to go and buy groceries and blend the food yourself. There are like options. And those aren't even being pushed. You know what I'm saying? Like something as simple as that. And I don't is it cuz they're more difficult, like they're not even that much more difficult to prep or to give? Is it just that there's just no education on them, or is it a newer is it are they newer, is that why?
A little bit of all the above. I mean, they're newer in a way, but like, I don't know, at least I think 10 years. I mean, some products have just come out
Mm,
recently. There's been blended products. I don't quote me on this, but I would say at least 8 to 10 years. But then, I'm involved with a lot of different dietitian talks and spaces. And I think that because some of the products are thicker, which that thicker product can make a huge difference for reflux. So we haven't really touched on that. But, when thin formula, it just comes up so easily. So a simple change can be just if your child really struggles with reflux or vomiting, using one of the thicker products, it sits a little heavier in the stomach. If they have a sensitive gag reflex, if they're moving a lot, you can't keep a kid upright 24/7. That can be a simple change that really helps their reflux and vomiting. But because it's thicker, our tube feeding equipment, again, I don't know if it's because I shouldn't even get into that, but like I don't know if they make tube feeding equipment just to work for formula to support formula companies, or if it's
wouldn't shock me.
just it's hard to say. I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of thought behind that, and I see some truth behind that. But I also think there are products like there's that new Omni pump that's made specifically for thicker food. So there are
Mm.
companies that are coming with pumps and products that make giving real food easier. But again, clinicians, it's crazy as a dietitian, you are given, at least in my experience, zero training on like equipment. I didn't have my hands on like a syringe, a pump, an extension tubing until I asked for it from the dietitians at these medical supply companies. So you just have no knowledge yourself. It's kind of left to nursing to do the like teaching of the actual administration. So I think dietitians
Yeah,
are
but
just,
that's that's so crazy.
I know,
That is
and it is
so crazy.
like I know the hospital I used to work at, now the dietitians are doing the training because they want more hands-on experience. So it is, things are changing hopefully, but um, I think there's just a lack of experience. There's also this thought, well, formula provides all the vitamins and minerals I need, like the child needs. So why do they need to have real food? It feels so backwards because as a dietitian, you should like want to help people with food. But when you're so ingrained that like formula is complete, it's given everything that they need, you don't really think much of it until you start to hear. I think that's part of what helped me too, is I just had so many families using these commercial products or doing not so many, but those little pocket that were doing commercial products or home blends and doing so much better that I started to think, okay, what's going on with this? But until then, I didn't really think of it. I just thought kids with feeding tubes vomit more because they have medical stuff going on. But it's not really the food all the time. Or I'm sorry, it's not their medical condition all the time. It's sometimes what's being, given through their feeding tube. So I don't know. I
Well,
think
and everything is just we live in a society now today where you have acid reflux. Okay, we're just going to give you some Milacon or some gas drops as a kid and some gripe water, and we're going to add in this other medication and this and that, and or we're just going to slow the feed rate down. things that like instead of addressing the issue, or they're like, let's just keep changing, your formula 8 million times till we get something that works instead of, like you said, if people did more research, understood that if you thickened up maybe the food, like I feel like we just put band-aids on things instead of going to the root issue a lot of the times. And unfortunately, sometimes, it's just the hospital in some settings are just so busy that they just don't have the resources to, or they're not even trained to go
Right.
to the root cause.
Right.
And
It's
two, I
but
mean, it is hard with the pumps and stuff. It's like they make it sometimes difficult for real food blends. Like it's like, why couldn't they just make them a little bit wider, a little bit, the bag's not as finicky. But
right.
I mean, we just push the stuff in syringes, which in itself, the syringes they give us are a joke. Don't even get me started on the syringes they give me 4 of them a month and they're single use and they explode all the time. And poor Jordan's cleaning my ceilings all the time because I just have a false sense of confidence with getting the air out of them every time. I don't know why I don't learn, but it's yeah, it's like sometimes I feel like they just like the medical world. I don't even know what world it is, but they like to make it as difficult as possible for medical parents, especially when we're trying to go against the grain a little bit.
Right.
That's the one
And
thing. If you go, yeah.
no, go ahead.
No, you're good. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I think it's hard too because I really think that a lot of medical professionals want to help, but it's like these higher up people who are in charge of like the business side of the hospital and the big pharma, big food companies control so much of it that the clinicians are just stuck with what they have. And I think that so much is so slow that blended food is like somewhat new and popular. It's always been around, but it's becoming more popular. And so our equipment is just a little bit behind. But there is stuff that makes it a little bit easier. It's just I still feel like families are jerry rigging things together to make this work. But for the first time, we actually have guidelines for dietitians. Like until fall of 2023, there was not any guidelines for dietitians on how to do blended diets. And so
Hmm.
that finally came out. And so hopefully that trickles back to dietitian education and then clinicians that are so by the book will see that there's guidelines out there that say that it's safe and here's some ways to do it. I still think that the guidelines could make it a little bit easier for families, but it's a start, and hopefully that helps change things. I mean, even I had some dietitian interns with me this past year who had a lab in their college class that taught them how to blend food for tube feeding. So I think we're seeing some changes. Of course, it's going to be slow, but I'm hopeful that, because more of the younger dietitians are definitely more open to this. It's just they don't have the time or the training. And like, it's not rocket science. It's just food being prepared, but blended at the end. And so I just think it's going to take some time for families to get some more confidence to do this. And I think, you and I were going to talk about just some ways for families to get started because this all sounds like fine and dandy. And, we can complain about
Hmm.
all these, but if it's not realistic for families to try this, I think that it's not that helpful either. So I want to help families who are interested in this, but aren't exactly sure where to start and um, want to try this, but it has to obviously be very realistic for them and reassuring to the medical team so they don't have to feel like they're going rogue or like they're doing something wrong.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. Let me look at my list. There's, I mean, it's intimidating. It's really intimidating, and that's why I didn't know where to start. And it's also hard because you really can't do it on your own unless you're very trained in like calorie intake and doing all of the different numbers and stuff. I have no idea how the hell to do any of that. So having Hillary is very helpful because she can do all the math side of it. Whereas like I can blend everything, that's easy, but I just don't even know what he needs. Like, because then you worry like it's funny, like you said, these tube fed kids are held to such like a high standard. Whereas if I had a normal 20-month-old, no one would be asking how many calories I'm giving him a day. I'd be giving him whatever he'd eat and he'd probably eat some of it, throw some of it. And some days he probably wouldn't eat much at all, but he'd be
Mhm.
fine. And then the next day he eat a good meal, because they're just a kid. Whereas just because he has a tube, he's expected to get like this certain exact amount of calories every day, blah, 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 and certain minerals and this and that. Whereas most 2-year-olds that you see at the park, who knows what they're getting, but nobody's, telling them that they're not doing enough. So it's frustrating, like the double standard that us like two parents are kind of held to. But I get it because you want to give a good diet because they have other medical things going on. So by giving a good, well balanced diet, it does help them with their other things. And like for John, he has a trach, and so his lungs are still very sick. So he works really hard when he's moving and exercising and doing things. So he burns a lot of calories. So he does need to make sure he gets his calories and whatnot. But still, it's a very intimidating process to start, but there are things that you can do. And so I don't know if you want to go kind of what would your top 3 things that you could tell a parent, where can you start? What are some small things that you can do that you would recommend?
Yeah, because you're right. It's like you are held to this higher standard and you're so used to a really controlled plan. And so I do think, and my goal is to help families get confident enough to not have to be so regimented and calorie controlled, but it makes the transition a lot easier. And it really
Yep.
helps medical professionals get on board if they see that you're meeting calorie needs. And then, like, it just kind of takes away a little bit of the concern and the going rogue thing. And then once they see what you're doing and that, John's doing so much better, then they start to loosen their grip a little bit. And then you can start to get a little bit more treating them like a typical child where you're just blending whatever if you want. But, I think it is helpful if you're going to batch blend to like have recipes to follow, just because then you just know exactly what you're going to blend. You just make it, and then maybe throughout the week you blend things randomly and you don't stress so much about the calories. Like that could be a good transition. But to take like a lot of steps back, as far as if you were wanting to try this and you aren't sure where to start, I always suggest starting with like very simple ingredients that are easily digestible. You don't even have to blend. You can get store-bought purees. So like go get the pouches at the store. You can even do the single food ingredient jars and just mix a little bit into their formula. So give yourself some confidence that you can put something else through a feeding tube other than formula. Mix a little bit of that stage 1 puree into the formula. It can be like a tablespoon, 2 tablespoons, and start to build up a little bank of like, okay, he did okay with sweet potatoes. He did okay with avocado. He did okay with banana. And just starting that way helps you get your feet wet a little bit. You're not changing the nutrition too much and you're just testing
Mhm.
things out. You can stay there for a long time. You could even so much as like give 1 pouch of store-bought puree a day, and maybe that's what you do for a while and see how that helps them. And for a lot of kids that can help settle their stomach or just help with their pooping. So that can be a good way just to get started and not even have to blend necessarily. And then
Mhm.
maybe after that, you like make your own banana puree. So you use like a NutriBullet or your Ninja and just like blend a little banana with some water, and you just kind of test out blending that way. Get your feet wet, but don't like jump into a full-fledged recipe and come up with this perfect nutrition plan on paper and have this like crazy transition that you're not ready for. Just take it one step at a time. So often I think we get this feeling like, okay, I'm doing this blended diet and now I have to jump full in and it's going to be all this work. But, just like a kid who's starting to eat by mouth, you're not going from their breast milk or formula to a full-fledged solid diet in 2 weeks. It wouldn't be good for their digestive tract. It wouldn't be good for you. You'd be like, what the heck am I supposed to be giving them?
Yep.
So I think just thinking of it that way is you're starting slow and, um, testing out foods that way. And then the method I came up with the recipes is to use like very easy recipes that we call our starter recipes. They have just a few easily digestible ingredients. Example would be like carrot and avocado, or like sweet potato, applesauce, and some flaxseed. And so you just start with one of those, pick one recipe. And because it's the same calorie match as your formula, you can swap out one meal. Or for you were doing J feeds. And so we could just, still swap one for one, putting his food into his G and, slowly take away formula, add a little of the blended food, daily calorie intake stays the same, and it just makes that transition so much easier. But my goal is not for families to have to be like perfectly regimented forever. I just think it helps you get through that transition from formula to blended food. You feel good that we know their calorie intake is staying the same. I'm testing out some foods. And you can just, you could stick with half the plan as formula and half the plan as blended food. It doesn't have to be this like in a month you're blending all their food. You could pick 2 recipes a week to batch blend, give those throughout the week and stick there
Mhm.
for a long time. It doesn't have to be this total overhaul. It's totally up to you and your capacity, and it's just good to take it slow. Like you go too fast, they're going to have digestive issues and constipation because just like a kid eating by mouth, if you give them too much solids at once, their little digestive tract isn't used to it and they need some time to
Mhm.
adjust. So, give yourself permission to take it slow for yourself, but also it's going to go a lot better for your child if you introduce things slowly to them too.
Mhm. Yeah. You take it slow. I mean, that's what we did. We had to go really slow. We just did the single jars and we put a little bit in his formula and slowly introduced different things to him every day. And yeah, I mean, it's a very slow process, like training for a marathon. I mean, you just slowly just introduce things. And also, like you said, for the parent, you don't want to overwhelm yourself either, And so I found too now that we're doing, the blended foods, and he's still not even on it all the time, but I do like grocery delivery or grocery pickup. And so I will sit there with the recipes that I have and then I just check my house of what I have already, but then I literally can just put it in and it makes it so much easier because you don't have to like go through the whole grocery store looking for all these different things. And so that's really helpful. And another way of like, I've had a lot of trial and error. Is with storing stuff in the freezer is I get these like silicone ice tray kind of things, but they're like I think they're like 2.5 ounces, and so you literally just like they're like molds, and you just pour the blender and you pour it in, and so that when it's time for him to eat, I just I plop them out and put them in baggies, and I label the baggies with what's in each one, and that's been helpful too. And so it's like a very slow process because if I was to just go like all in from the beginning, I would have given up. I would have been like, this is too much because it's a
Right.
lot. It is a lot. But when you go slowly, it's not a lot, if that makes sense. I mean, that's kind of confusing, but it can be definitely a lot. I mean, and we talked about the benefits of this. And even if, like you're saying, you can just give your kid a pouch throughout the day through their tube. Even that benefit, I mean, is huge. I really think, like, just for your overall, like, immunity, like, for your immune system, don't you think that adding in, like, just like real whole foods to your immune system has to be helpful, especially during like virus season? For your immune system has to be
Mhm.
so excited to get those real nutrients and not just like not that formula is like artificial nutrients. Like the formula serves its purpose and it is, does have the nutrients, but it's just I don't know, it's different. It's like me when I eat like a really good salad or a really good I don't know, whenever I start eating really good, like I feel better and I don't know, I just feel better. So there has to be, science to it. So I don't know if you want to go over even more benefits that I haven't mentioned or go more into detail about it.
Yeah, for sure. And even that too, like in our group, we have like an immunity blend. So it's got like, carrots and oranges and turmeric and ginger. And even if you had that recipe and could just give a little bit of that as like a fluid flush a couple times, if they're starting to get sick, there's so many benefits
Wait,
to real food and the way
where is that blend? I need that blend.
it's, yeah, it's in there, like the bonus recipes. It's like there's a
Oh,
bunch of like
okay.
sick health blends
Okay.
that you could use. That one's more meant to be like a fluid thing, where you can just give a little bit as like a water flush, but it has a lot. I mean, I actually just drink it myself for around this time of the
Yeah.
year to help me when sick. So, yeah, you can put that through the tube. But that's a big benefit of blending is that you have so much flexibility and variety. So, when your child is sick, the hard thing with the formula is that you either give it or you don't because that's your only option. And so when you're sick, you don't want this like full-fledged meal. You want toast or applesauce or a banana or soup. And so it can be really helpful when your child is sick to just make some of these like sick day recipes where you can give a little bit of nutrition still. It's going to sit easier on their stomach, give them some nutrition, and you don't have to go days and days without them getting anything. And you also have the flexibility to, blend up a Thanksgiving dinner or like
Mhm.
birthday cake or just like whatever the family is eating. You can have the confidence to be able to include them in holiday meals or pizza night or whatever. We even have a recipe for pizza night. So like, the idea is just to create some more flexibility. And too, like families will have specific dietary preferences, and it's hard to find a formula that always meets what you want to give your family. So you have a lot more options in that way too. But, I think the biggest things are really the digestive stuff that we talked about and getting that variety and helping with bowel regularity and that sort of thing. But I honestly think the emotional benefits too can just be so I don't know the word I'm looking for, but like the biggest part is like, and we've touched on this, but just being able to pick out the groceries and cook for your child and take back an aspect of parenting when so much is out of your control and to see what's going in the feeding tube. Um, and again, like this could even just be using the commercial products too, if that works best for you. Because like real food blends, it's 100% real food and it has variety, and you could give that most of the time. You could blend food into the real food blends, and then maybe on random days you're giving them what you guys are having if you have the tools to be able to do that. So I just think it opens the doors to so much more variety and flexibility and normalcy and, you know, when your kid's not puking all the time and you can leave the house and not worry about the next vomit or your feeding times are shorter, it just really opens up the doors of your quality of life and what you can focus on. Cause I'm kind of rambling here, but if you like are dealing with puking all the time, 24/7, you can't leave your house, you're on all these medications, and now therapies are hard because you can't lay your child on the floor and participate in all this stuff because they puke all the time. It's just
Yep.
like opens the doors to helping with that. And so this is not really what you asked, but I think if you're wanting to get started and you feel like you are completely in the weeds, look into some of these commercial blend products, and maybe we can link it in the show notes. But I have that article that goes over what's available and just
Yes.
can help you decide what would be best. Maybe you start there. Maybe you start with a commercial real food product. It doesn't take more of your time. You get your digestive issues a little bit more under control. You get some more time and energy back, and then you can try some of the home blending. It doesn't have to be this like you have to make the food. There's products available that you might not even be aware of that could be
Mhm.
the simplest fix to start with.
I mean, I had no idea. I mean, the big one you always see is like Kate Farms, right? Like that one's very well known. So they do have the blended food one. So Hillary has this article, and I will link it in the notes here for the show notes because I think it'll help so many different families. And these are things that you can, if you have a dietitian you work with, they can work on getting them for you with insurance, or your GI can work on them as well. Um, and if you have this article, then you have the links to everything and you have all the information in them. But the article is great. It kind of gives you, if your kid does is more this and more this, maybe this one will work better, and the benefits, the pros and cons of each different one. But I honestly thought there was only like the real the I have it back here. I could grab one. The real whole food or the real blends. What's that one's called? The
Real
real
food
food
blends.
blends. Yeah. So real food blends is the one that I kind of liked the best, and so we have that to try with John. But there's so many. There's like Nourish, the Kate Farms ones, and then there was a few other ones, and that was shocking to me. I really didn't know that there was that many on the market. And so that's
Yeah. And
exciting that there
samples.
are different options out there.
Right. And you can even get samples. Like your clinician can request samples for you. You can try all of them, see what works best for you before you even jump down the insurance hoops. Because more companies, like medical supply companies, are accepting them into their formulary. But sometimes you work with a company that doesn't have everything. And so if you find one that you really like before you go through the hoops of like switching a company, make sure that you try it and it works well for you before you like, because those calls to those DMEs don't always, rarely are they like headache free. So
No, no, that's the social work side of being a medical parent is the worst part. Just being oh, paper put. I mean, the amount of time I spend on the phone fighting for things is just wild. I swear they
Mhm.
make it difficult for us parents. Like it's like their job. And it's not the people who work at the company. It's just the system is it sucks.
Yeah.
All
Yeah.
right, let's see. Some tricks for doing, because I mean it is different when you, and it was a shock to me when I started introducing even um just like the pre-made blended stuff into formula. It made a huge difference for the pump, like for how
Mhm.
the pump worked. And it would clog all the time. It was just being such a pain in the ass. And so it was really frustrating at first. So, I mean, the tips that I would give is to have patience. And it's going to be a lot of trial and error. You might go through a couple different bags. I also have the Infinity, no, not the Infinity. I have the Kangaroo or the whatever pump, the Joey pump, which I think is like the worst pump.
Mhm.
I feel like people have better luck with blended foods with the infinity pump. Would you agree with that or no?
Yes, for sure.
Okay. Yeah. So we went through like a lot of different bags at first and it was very frustrating. And so you kind of learn with time when you like start priming the pump to like wiggle it a little bit so that the food like doesn't just like get stuck and then you waste a bag. So that would be like my one thing is just like trial and error and just kind of like move the bag a bit at the beginning so that it doesn't get stuck. But we have found now that we use syringes to push a lot of the food and we just do manual push, like very slow, like you just push like 5 mLs at a time or 10 mLs, whatever you kind of graduate to when they can handle certain things. But we do that. And the O-rings, is that what they're called, the different syringes, like the 60 ml syringes, so the ones the DME gives are the awful purple ones that have the big plunger and they're so bad. But we have a bunch that we got from the hospital before and they're still hanging on for dear life. And so they're like the
Mhm.
O-ring ones, and those ones are great. But I did recently learn, I think you posted something about it too, um, that you have to take the thing off to clean inside of it. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
And so the other day I did that and it was disgusting what was in there. And I felt so gross that I was like using those. So yeah, so if you have those, make sure you take the little thing off to clean inside. That would be a
Right,
tip.
right. Yeah. But the O-ring ones make a huge difference because the ones that you were explaining, the
Yes.
purple ones, though they're made for like one-time use and it has a rubber plunger which expands when it's wet, where these O-ring syringes have a silicone plunger that doesn't expand. So they're meant to be reusable. So you can sometimes you can get these covered by insurance, but sometimes most people have to purchase them out of pocket. But
Yeah.
they're since they're reusable, you can get 5 to 10 syringes for like 30 to 40 bucks, not buy them
Mhm.
again for 4 to 6. So you can use them for a long time. But it makes
Yeah.
the pushing of a syringe so much easier because it doesn't get sticky. Um, yeah, it glides so much easier. You can also like spray the plunger of the syringe with like an olive oil spray or a cooking spray. That can help with the glide, either way.
I've
If
done
you,
it. It's somewhat helps, but the with the plunger, you mean with like the purple ones? God, those it's like
yeah,
why do they even create those? They're so bad. Like they're so bad. I don't know why they wouldn't just do the O ones. I don't get
I
it.
would think the company would save money if they didn't have to spend so many, but there's obviously something behind the scenes that we don't understand. I mean, most people too, if you're using a syringe for formula because it's thin, you don't have to use the plunger. You're just letting gravity do the work for
Mhm.
you. But blended food, you have to use the plunger. So again, I think it's just like blended food is not the standard, and so they're not catering to they're catering to more of the mass of using formula. But yeah, O-ring syringes, definitely get those. With pump feedings, Infinity Pump works a lot better, and you can even modify the feeding bag. So there's a way to like clip this piece in the feeding bag that cuts this little piece out that's really small and where food often gets clogged. So if you have an
Oh.
Infinity Pump, Google how to modify the bag because that will save you a lot of headaches. There is that Omni kangaroo pump, which actually I've heard that all the old kangaroo pumps are getting phased out and everyone's going to get this Omni pump. that's meant for thicker food, which is pretty cool. So that's going to be coming, who knows when. Like they say that's happening, but it could be like years before everyone's actually gets switched out, especially if they have a ton of like Joey bags that they need to use for the old pump. I'm sure they'll wait, but yeah,
Oh
so that
yeah.
pump will be a little
Oh
bit.
yeah. I bet they'll probably wait to phase out because they probably have so many of those bags. Because is it so it's a different bag for the pump then? I'm assuming.
Yeah, yeah. But that's a step in the direction that, like, I was thinking people would have to fight tooth and nail to get this Omni pump, but it sounds like that's going to be their norm. And so that's pretty cool that a pump is meant to work with thicker food and thicker commercial products and give it easier without the headaches. Because you're right, like you don't want to go through these bags. And I think a big thing is like to avoid some of these issues is having a blender that works well. So something that's going to liquefy the food. There's medical discounts available. Maybe that's something else we can link to, as well as, what blender you could use and what medical discounts are available. I have another article on my website about that too, that we can link to help people with that. Because that makes a big difference too, is if you're using a blender that is capable of liquefying all food, you run into a lot less issues than if you have one that's going to be, just doesn't catch the seeds and the peels and the tough pieces. And yes, you can strain your meal, you can put it through a fine mesh strainer, but if your blender's not the best, you're going to end up with a lot of food still in the strainer. And that can be a concern too. You don't want to have half of your food in the strainer that's not given to your child. That can, lead to a lot of nutrient loss. So using something like a Vitamix or a Blood Tech can make a huge difference to help with getting this equipment to, help the food flow through better.
Yeah. I think I need to get a blend tech. I have the Ninja one now that's been working really well, but I will say the recipes that have any type of bread in it, I have to really strain, and then there's like a not a decent amount, but like an okay amount that like is in the strainer afterwards. But that's the only one that
Mm-hmm.
I have issues with pushing that gets clogged is the ones with the bread. And
Okay.
that's what those are his favorite. He likes the peanut butter and jelly one and the pesto deli sandwich. He loves that one. But
Mm-hmm.
I honestly think that I might, because I know with certain insurances you can like apply and get it for like what, $70 or $75 or something around that, right?
Yeah, it's not even in your face. It's just a medical discount request. So we don't submit anything for
Yeah.
insurance. It's just one form that basically, like, I, as a dietitian or your clinician, explains why it's needed. And I usually say something like, so and so is struggling with digestive issues, and real food has been shown to help with improving digestive issues. And having a blend tech will make sure this kid can get a variety of the nutrition that they need to grow and thrive. I've never had anyone denied, and I've filled out more than 300 of those
Oh,
forms or
beautiful.
whatever. So it's very easy to get them covered. And yeah, it's somewhere between 50 to 75. Sometimes I find people get them for 50. I'm not sure what the difference is, but yeah, it's a refurbished blender. I don't think people really have issues with it. And if they do, customer service is what I hear really great.
How much is a blend tech like new? Like a new blend tech? Aren't they expensive?
Yeah, it depends on the model, but 300, 400, $500
Yeah, it's a lot.
typically. And that's a big expense. Like that's a big investment, especially if you're not sure if it's going to be what you want to do. But
Yes.
again, if you're just getting started, and even like our starter recipes are just blending those easily digestible foods, like you can use a NutriBullet or a Ninja for a long time. It's not like you have to have this blender to get started. But if you are going to do this more long term and you want to provide more well-rounded nutrition, it is a very helpful tool to have something that you can literally throw anything in and it will liquefy. It's kind of amazing. You look at these blenders, you're like, how the heck does that? There's not even blades hardly, and it just whips everything to liquid form. It's pretty cool.
It's wild. Like I put everything
Uh-huh.
in and all of a sudden it's just liquefied. I'm like, that is wild. And some of the things I
Mhm.
put in there, I'm like, how is it going to blend that up? And it does. Like the dates always confuse me because the dates are so thick. And then when you put them in and it's just crazy to me. It is really
Mhm.
cool. It is like that gratification of like, I don't even know. Like it's just crazy to put all the food in and then to know that that's what he's going to get. It's really fun for me at least. So, but I need to look into that blender thing, and I'll link that if you want to send me different links to help parents with that for sure. So, I mean, and like for We do the a lot of the like Serenity, is it Serenity Kids? No. Yes. That's like a cuz I'm very picky about what ingredients I use and stuff, and so that's all like very clean or ingredients, very limited or ingredients, and so John likes those as well. Like he'll eat those orally, and then we did use those at the beginning. We would sometimes they're a little bit thicker, so we would water them down and do those as well in his formula and whatnot for him to get used to it. So there's just so many options out there, like to get started. Like there's just so many different ways to get started before you jump all the way in. And Hillary's about to have a baby any day now.
Yeah,
So
it'd be oh, it's coming up fast.
when are you due? End of December, end of this month?
January 2nd, so
Okay.
end of next month.
Yeah. So, so she's gonna be busy for the next couple months, but eventually you'll probably open back up she does 1-to-1. She has a lot of different programs that she does, so she's a great person to work with. Unfortunately, a lot of us medical parents know that we end up paying out of pocket because insurance just doesn't cover. I mean, it's hard to find people to work with. We pay for John's speech therapist out of pocket. Like there's a lot of things that you have to pay for out of pocket because Medicaid and other things, can only cover so much, and you really want to get your kid the best of the best. But I will say it's worth every single penny to work with Hillary. So Hillary's amazing. I can't say enough good things about her and what she's doing for the blended tube family, the tubey families out there. I know I already sent a couple moms your way, but it's
Well,
exciting to see other moms.
that community group too, like if you don't want to do the one-on-one, there is other ways to
Yes,
go with the resources and that sort of thing too. So, I mean, sometimes it's nice to just be told what to do and like have someone look at your plan with you and personalize things, but I've put my full program into a online community space. So, if you're
yes,
somebody that wants to just get started and like just have the recipes and be shown how to blend and how to pick one recipe and just test things out, all of that's in that community space that you can subscribe to. And that's much more accessible. That one's only $37 a month to be in that group. So you can like get your feet wet. Everything's
yes.
downloadable. That will still be open even when I'm off. I have a excellent parent who is uh, very well versed in tube feeding, and she has a daughter herself who has a feeding tube, so she's going to be covering while I take some time off, and then
Awesome.
February I'll be back in there and helping families, and so it's just a little short little time off, but yeah, there's ways to get support too if you don't have the resources to do one-on-one. And we can link some of that information below too. But the group is like really, I think it's a really supportive group. Some of those Facebook groups can be a little toxic at times and shame people
Yes.
for what they're doing. And we have none of that in this group, which is awesome.
No, it's great. That's how I started with you originally. Was I joined the group, and
Oh yeah.
then but because John was on the J feed, I was just going to do the group and do it myself and going to make it work. And I honestly felt pretty confident in it. But then I had talked to one of the dietitians who had the 6-month waiting list for blended food. And she told me, just make sure you work, directly with someone because the J feeds are this and that kind of, basically told me I needed to work with someone directly because of his J feed thing. So it kind of freaked me out a little bit. So I was like, all right, fine. So I signed up for the thing, which I'm very glad that I did. And thankfully, we've been able to get John off of J feeds, which I think that Blend Foods has had a huge role in getting him off of the J feeds as fast as he did. But
Yeah, he's
yeah, so the group is amazing. I mean, there's so many recipes in there. There's so many moms sharing their stories and sharing different tips and tricks. I mean, it's a great place to learn and meet other moms in the community as well.
yeah, yeah. And you've been so fun to work with. And I mean, John has done like absolutely amazing. There's also this like light about him where he's like just such a joy too whenever he's on video. So I'm happy that we got to work together one on one because I get to see him and
Yeah,
have gotten to know you. And I don't know, I think you're doing really cool things in this podcast. So it's been really fun for me too.
thanks. Yeah, John will join in on our weekly calls because I usually don't have a nurse, and so John will just be in the background trying to steal the phone. That's his new thing, is to steal the phone. But
And just
yeah,
being so cute.
he's a funny boy. But yeah, so we will link all the things we talked about in the description of this podcast or in the podcast notes. I'm still new to this podcast world, so I don't know what all those things are called. But yeah, so there'll be an article about basically different options for whole food blends that already come pre-made, different blender options, and how to join her amazing online community that she has with different recipes and different moms. But I just want to say thank you for everything and thank you for being here today. And you need to enjoy some time off once that baby comes. We will all be okay without you for a little bit. We will miss you, but enjoy your time off. But is there anything else you want to add in?
I don't, I just want to encourage parents to, you know, you have options out there, and also like trust your gut. You know what's best for your child. And if you're being told it's not safe or it's not appropriate to do this, like trust your instinct. Don't let people gaslight you into thinking that you're doing something wrong. There's people out there that want to help, that want to support you, so just keep advocating for yourself and your child, and um, know that there's ways to do this that makes it a lot easier. And I hope that just this encourages you to like, find that there is some relief and some hope for an easier tube feeding journey. And we're here to support you, Nicole, too. And hopefully we can support you guys inside the group. Or if anything, like I have an Instagram, Blended Tube Feeding. There's a ton of free resources there. My website has a ton of free resources. So you're also welcome to start there and just, learn from that way too. You don't have to necessarily join the group. So, but yeah, I hope this was helpful. And it was such a fun conversation with you today. I mean, we've only been working together for like 2 months, but I feel like I've been working with you a lot longer. I feel like it's been awesome to work with you. So thank you to you too.
Yeah, I know it has felt longer. It's weird. And I feel like
Mhm.
I've been home with John now for like so long, but it's only been 3 months, which is wild. It's really cool. So we're very grateful for you. And yes, there's so many resources of hers online on her Instagram, different ways to learn. And another way for parents to learn things that I've learned is just through like hashtags, like hashtag blended food, like
Mhm.
blended feeding, different things like that. Like there's just honestly like TikTok and things like that serve their purpose in ways of helping people in our community, just to learn, share different ways to help your kid. And yes, always advocate like a mother, advocate like crazy, because no one else is going to do it for you or for your kid. So never let any doctors gaslight you. It's what they like to do. Not all. Some of them are great, but yeah, it's a fun world we live in. But all right. Well, thank you. Thank you. Thank you for coming to the Daily Vent podcast, a medical mom podcast. We are so grateful for everyone who has stayed and listened to this episode. We will link all of Hilarie's details below, so check her out and know that no matter how you are feeding your kid, you are doing a great job, and your kid loves you and your kid is happy, and it doesn't matter how they're being fed as long as they're being fed is basically the answer. So
I
thank you so much.